Much goodness today, there's still more. A few words for you, continuing to deepen what we've been talking about for 30 days for the earth. And a couple of weeks ago, when we first started on our journey together, we acknowledged that we've inherited a watershed-dominant culture, one that has at its core a belief that we are still reconciling with and still struggling with. And that at its core, there's a belief that some of this world is alive and some of this world is dead. That some of us get classified as beings and that some of us get classified as non-beings. And we acknowledge that this even informs the way that we've tried to get back to nature, that even as we resist over-exploiting the natural world, that then there was a tendency to move towards conservation, preservation, keeping wilderness preserved, pure, untouched. But these options, one, use, abuse, and exploit, or two, protect, defend, and maintain as pure, don't actually have anything to do with real relationship. Both of these postures, you're mine and I'm entitled to you, or you need to be protected and only I know what's best for you, have at their root a common ethic that is, I control you. And there's something better, which is what we've been exploring these 30 days, that something more generative, more alive, more worthy than I control you is I am related to you. I am also that. So we're asking ourselves, how do we live with that knowing that we are profoundly related in our bones? And what would it do to our lives if we lived with that knowing in our bones? Well, we have some lessons, of course, from California. We have inherited an ancestry of fire. When Spanish colonizers would see these hillsides all over Pasadena, 25 miles out from the ocean, they saw poppies. And they said, this is the land of fire. Can you imagine how clear the air must have been? They said, this is the land of fire. Fire, some ecologists think, created 3/4 of all of the vegetation in California. Pyrodiversity creates biodiversity. Indigenous peoples had practices, the art and science of tending fire on landscapes, but of course, as you might predict from sermons that I preach, our state did not follow a similar ethic. By about 1905, this was what the Forest Service said about fire. I almost want our Frank Underwood impression back up here for this. The Forest Service is solidly opposed to any sort of light burning because we have seen it practiced many times under all sorts of conditions, and foresters of civilized nations don't do it. The underlying principles of all scientific forestry, however, are these: save young growth and trees, protect soil, encourage reproduction, fill up all the possible gaps in the forest floor, do not make any more fires, and fight all fires to a finish. Politics. You hear those words, right? Save, protect, reproduce. More is better. Fight it. So by 1935, the state and federal government created a firefighting paramilitary, quickly stamping out all fires through rapid mobilization of firefighters, equipment, and technology. But why? Economics driving land relationships, land classification, land science, and land policy. More trees equaled more for foresters and logging. And firefighting led to saving buildings, private property. I also imagine that there is something so powerful, so sacred, so transformative, so unwilling to be controlled in fire, that if you are rooted in a domination ethic, then fire will be an affront to you. So with our land relationships driven by this belief in our separateness of beings and non-beings, California trees lost their co-conspirators, humans. California trees lost their co-conspirators. They were human beings. The ecological results of this were enormous. Forests clogged, young saplings taking up water stressed out old trees and made them susceptible to bark beetle. In one study, fires suppressed San Bernardino had 300 trees per an acre, where a similar forest in Mexico, left to have natural fires, had 60 per acre. When biologists from North America said, this was stunning, we have the oldest, biggest, most alive trees. Only a revealing of an ethic that more is always better. But these led ways for catastrophic fires. Thriving on the twigs and branches and buildup from below, their heat, their magnitude doesn't regenerate, it devastates. And what about those very trees, those giant sequoias that all those men tried to save from those men who would exploit them? Well, even those trees need fire to release their seeds. The cones require ash and open gaps in the forest, and due to fire suppression, small cones were described as hanging on trees for years, waiting for a fire to pass below to open the cone and release a seed rain at 8 million seeds per acre. Sequoias stopped producing. The trees needed fire, or needed humans to set fire. They required the relationship. Humans and trees co-evolved with one another. No relationship, no tending, no transformation, no heat, no flame, no sequoia. It appears that this pristine wilderness that so many talked about early on wasn't actually pristine wilderness at all. It was actually a cultural landscape of mutual co-creation. So what does this mean for us here, standing in the fire of relationship? Well, fire at its core is our capacity to tease out the sun energy from another being. The sun was in there all along. The creation of fire is seeing the sun in another being. Fire, by knowing this, resists the idea that some of this is alive and some of this is dead, and fire says, it's all alive, and I'm all up in it. So what are things we can do to stay with the aliveness, to resist the false separation that some of us is alive and some of us is dead? 2 things. First, a practice from depth psychology called notitia, which literally means to notice, is the idea that we can walk through the world and be so available to it because it might have a better idea of what we should be doing with our time than we do. So for example, a nasturtium outside in the troop garden, you notice it, but no, notitia says you didn't notice it, it noticed you. The flower actually called you when you had the quality of being in the world with the baseline assumption that this world is alive, that the world has wisdom, and that which is other to you is actually deserving and has a right to your attention. Now that right to our attention is also at the core of the most important social justice movements of our time. When we say water is life in Standing Rock, we are saying that world is alive, water is alive, and that indigenous people have a right to self-determination. When we say Black Lives Matter, we are making a theological commitment that all bodies, Black, trans, queer, disabled bodies, are alive, are wise, are self-determining, and have a right to the attention of others. And for those of us who are Black, that we have the right to self-determine and transform our world. To say it's alive, this is alive, we are alive, I am alive, is a theological commitment. And this is where our responsibility comes in. To tend a fire, to create a fire, is to be in responsible relationship to heat and transformation. To build something from small to large requires that you are actually responsive to that which is actually in front of you. And when we say responsibility, we break this word apart in the way of philosopher Kelly Oliver to say it is two words: response and ability. That we are cultivating our capacity to respond, that we are able to respond. So what this asks as we leave here: am I doing, when I do what I do, does it create the possibility of response from the one who is in front of me? Is the way I'm approaching, speaking, showing up, noticing, responding, creating fire and possibility, or is it closing off possibility? Is what I'm doing opening up like a seed rain the possibility of transformation in front of me? Is what I'm doing making it possible that I will hear the call of the world and the people, all of whom have a right to my attention and the right to my transformation? And if the root of an ethic of separation and control is control and domination, then the root of our ethic of responsibility and relationship is the possibility and the willingness that I will be changed by you. That you and I co-create each other. And that I will always act in service to the possibility of our co-creation. May fire guide us. May it help us notice each other, respond to each other, and be transformed by each other. May it be so. Amen.